Hello, everyone. This is Evan Abrams, and welcome to Behance live stream here. We are back. We are back with some more good motion design business. We are getting down to it. We're cracking open AfterEffects. We're making some cool stuff. If you've been following along with this series, then you've seen us morphing between a lot of objects over the last few weeks, and now we've come into our the third of three, where we're going to kind of pick up the leftovers. If you're just joining us, if you're tuning in on YouTube, then please come join us at behance.net. Come on over so I can see you in the chat. Everybody in the chat, I'd love to know who you are, where you're from, and what you do with After Effects. And in this show, I like to ask you all to be kind of my producers here to help me make design decisions. I really like to be I like to be outsourcing a lot of my mental labor to the crowd on this one. But let's get into it. Let's see what we're going to be doing. Like we talked about in the previous episodes, we have been going between a couple of objects. We've been animating from a cat to a computer. That was a good one. Let me just pull that up so that we can enjoy some of our previous works here. Go ahead and get my screen on here for you. So, like I said in previous things, we did some morphing where we went from a cat to a computer using some various techniques of motion design, of morphing from one thing to another. So that was a solid time. And then sort of after that, we went from a mouse to a globe. That was a good time as well. Kind of did that a little bit more live. And today we are going to explore the leftovers from our voting possibilities. We're going to try to go from a cell phone to kind of a network. And this is maybe my all-time, I don't know, this is number 2 or number 3 on the things I'm asked to do all the time. So this is pretty common in explainer videos. This is pretty common in, I want to say anything in this kind of abstract motion design-y space. So if anyone out there makes explainer pieces, if any of you do 3D or 2D motion design, then that's what we're going to be doing here. And I'm going to be leaning on you all for some creative decisions here. We got a lot of choices to make in motion design, and I hope you enjoy it. I'm seeing some people in the crowd here. We got Lindsay coming out. We got Techno Body. Munir is here. So yeah, let me know who you are, where you're from. I would love to see everybody chime in the chat. We got Aiken here is talking about typographic morphing in Flash. Oh, Flash indeed is back in the day. I remember when things were called Flash. It was Macromedia Flash, but that's CC Animate now. So if you loved Flash, CC Animate is here for you. But today, like I said, we're going to be working in After Effects, which uses a bunch of other types of tools. We don't get to do as much kind of morphing and that kind of thing, but we have a lot of fine control. I like to use a lot of shape layers, as you'll notice, and we're going to go through here and kind of talk about what we should be doing and how we're going to get from one thing to another. Let's see. I'll just go ahead and take a drink of water. My throat is pretty parched from having a lot of talk. We got people in from Egypt, which is fantastic. Let me know where you're from out there in the world. We got it's so good to see. So good to see these people out here. Something I will say also that I think this is the last show of the day. So, if you're not done with the streaming goodness, definitely come back on Monday. We got Voodoo Val and Tim. Tim is going to be there, and they're going to be doing some portrait drawing in Adobe Fresco. So definitely something you're going to want to come back for on Monday. But without further ado, let's get it going. So, when we are conceiving of going between two images or two objects in After Effects, we want to consider the shape of both of them. And if you have your druthers, if you have your way of the world and you're able to design both the beginning and end states of things, you're able to build in a lot of connectivity, a lot of common geometry, and you get to really exploit a lot of sort of design shortcuts to make that all happen. So let me just go ahead here. I actually want to show you what we did last week and the week before, because I think explaining where we've been is going to help talk about where we're going. And I want to show off, when you're morphing from one object to another, there are so many ways. There's infinite ways to get from one thing to another, from one shape to another, one collection of shapes that represent something to another. And I think it's helpful to talk about some of these methods and to see how they work. So, like I said, in the beginning, we went from a cat to a computer, right? And this used a method which is really just what we would call like a picture-in-picture, or one thing lives inside of the other. So in this case, we're able to leverage, because, cats, computers, we can just put a picture of the cat on the computer. That's maybe the easiest and cheapest way to go about this. It doesn't take super long to do, and it's not dependent on the design of the cat or the design of the computer. The first A and the B that we're going between are not going to hinder us in any way, because they can be independent. One can be a little pre-comp inside the other, and alterations to one don't affect the other. So that's one kind of method that we might do, right? And if we're talking about solving our network phone problem, if we're going to turn a phone into a network, or a network into a phone, we could use the same kind of method, because phones have screens. We swipe to the thing, we push in, there we are. It's not super sophisticated, but it is definitely a method to think about when you got a bit of a time crunch. Now, the other way we went is we went ahead with something that we called the intermediate phase. And this is the idea that we are going to transform one of the objects into something that can morph easily into the other. And as you can see, we have the cat. We transform the cat into this kind of a shape, like it's hunching down, and then we expand that, and that becomes a form that is similar to the laptop, and then the laptop transforms from that phase outward, right? So there's these intermediate phases as we go from objects that represent cat to objects that represent laptop, right, or computer. So that's the intermediate phase that we talked about. And then in the last episode, so last week, we went from a mouse to a globe. And we used a very different methodology to go from this mouse into a shape scene here. And this is what we would call the explode and combine technique. That's what I like to call this, because we're taking the bits that represent mouse, and we're literally just exploding them and recombining them into bits that represent planet. And this gives us a lot of abstract freedom that you can see here in the intermediate phases as things kind of transform their way from one to the other. It doesn't rely on either piece having a lot of commonality, because we can explode literally anything into its constituent geometry, or in the case of this ear, so if we follow the path of this ear here, it comes around and then literally is replaced by a bunch of layers as it seems to explode off of the surface that just seem to be made of the same thing. So we can fragment things, we can combine them. Using this exploding idea, it's very easy to go from one thing to another. We just have to bring on or split apart things, and as long as we keep the motion flowing, it can feel like the one thing is becoming the other thing, right? So that's another technique. So we'll say maybe that's technique 3, is the exploding and combining, right? And so with these angles that we might take, we have to approach our phone to network idea, right? So if the concept comes down the pipe, maybe a producer or somebody, comes at us with this idea, we're going to transform a phone into a network. How do we do it? Where do we go? So when I approach something like this, I've been asked to animate a phone turning into everything, anything you can name. We might go with an intermediate phase idea. So that's kind of what I've started here. And we're going to continue on with this kind of project. And we're using a little bit of 3D trickery in here. I like to play around with the 3D extrusion using the Cinema 4D renderer, which is something really fun that we can do in After Effects that allows us to extrude shape layers to create some very simplified 3D geometry. I'm a really big fan of making use of that stuff and of giving us a little bit of a little bit extra variety in our day that we can play with. So it's definitely something that I like to make use of. And let me know in the chat if you've ever explored this feature, if you've used the Cinema 4D extrusion before. I think what I'd like to do is show you how we might make this whole thing from scratch, how we might sort of model, in quotes, something inside of After Effects to leverage this kind of technology. So I'm going to go ahead, create a new comp here. Hey, Joel. Joel is back. Hello. Good to see you, man. Good to see you on all these streams. So good. So let's call this extrusion. Extrusion pass. And we're just going to talk real briefly in here about how these extrusions work, how we make them. So you can take literally any shape layer you like, and if you twirl down into the shape layer, you will notice, we have a whole lot of contents in here, and every layer, of course, has its own kind of transform stuff on here. And Joel is saying that he extrudes with Element 3D. So there are a lot of third-party plugins that can get you extrusion type things here in After Effects. I think you can make use of some really interesting plugins when we're going to start dealing with 3D geometry or 3D models, we would say. There's a lot of like trapcode form, trapcode particular. You can even load in .obj, .object files into those kinds of things. And Tim extrudes with caution. Oh, Tim, I love having you here. Fantastic. Always brightening my day. Tim cracks me up on almost every stream with his jokes, his chiming in. So if we wanted to extrude this, there's a few things we have to do. You got to make the layer 3D. That's number one. And if you don't see things like geometry and material options, you have to go up here. Hey there. Oh, who's this? This is Siamla. Lol. There we go. Yeah. Siamlal. Oh man, I think we know each other on Twitter, right? It's good to see everyone. Oh, Francisco's in the mix. Oh man. Francisco, the regular producer on the show when we're in studio. So let's go through and let's extrude this thing. So if we take our path and we just bring it down a little bit, if you want to extrude things using the Cinema 4D renderer, when you make something 3D, up here in the corner, it's going to say renderer and then colon some options. All right. So we can click on this, and this is going to pull open our extrusion or our composition settings. So usually when you open your comp settings, you're looking at the basic tab, you got your advanced tab, but here in the 3D renderer tab, depending on what version of After Effects you're on, and hopefully you are using the latest version, you'll see classic 3D, which is the default, and then we can go to Cinema 4D. So notice in classic 3D, this option down here is grayed out because we don't get to play with that. But when we switch it into Cinema 4D, this is going to tell us what things are now enabled and what things are now disabled. We cannot do these things. So we can no longer use blending modes, track mats, layer styles, masks and effects on these types of layers. So there's a lot a lot of the things that we can do now. There's a lot of things we can't do now. So when you're considering if this is going to be part of your solution, of your methodology, just remember that these things are all getting disabled. We don't have them anymore. But if you're going to be doing, if we're going to be doing things that are going to be fairly flat, if we are just going to be doing some very simple things in 3D, this will get you there, right? This will definitely make it happen. So let's go ahead, and I want to go into the options here as well, just to show you that there is an amount of depth to this. So we are looking at quality 1. I'm going to hit OK on that. I'm going to hit OK on this. Now, what does that mean? What does quality 1 mean? So if I go ahead, I'm going to take our geometry here. I'm going to extrude this out. You can't really see anything happening because we're just looking at it from the front. So I'm going to go to Custom View 1. And now you can see we're just kind of looking at it from almost an isometric angle, almost. I'm just going to start extruding this back. And notice it pushes backwards. It's pushing away from the camera. So that's important to remember, that as we extrude, things are being pushed away from the camera. All right. So I'm going to extrude this about 60 pixels maybe. And we're on quality 1. Remember, we said that quality 1. So look at the edges here and how bad they are. These edges are not being anti-aliased at all because we're on quality 1. If we go into our options and we start increasing our quality, you'll notice that we have all these little options in here, all these things that start to change. So as you drag the slider, notice that as we go from quality 1 even to quality 2, suddenly anti-aliasing switches on. Anti-aliasing is now going to be based on geometry. Fast but ugly. That's correct. So as we move it ahead, you'll notice that, oh, it's changed. We change. There's a certain point where we change, where we go from 50 to 51. That's another change. Our anti-aliasing is now having a different form of definition, deciding what pixels to keep and such. So as we keep going, you'll notice best 1 by 1, 2 by 2, da 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 da. So you'll notice this threshold number here is changing. So that's going down, 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 down. And you'll notice that this reflectance, so if you have reflectance in your scene. So these are all the numbers about what calculations are actually happening. And it's really recommended that you, when you're working out the motion of things, you can just leave it down here. You can leave it down here at draft. And you know, Tim, you're right. These are quality 100 because these are extreme. These are the most extreme streams you can get to. And so as you can see, as you jack it up to 99, we can't even get to 100 on this thing. But up here, things are going to look a lot nicer. So you'll notice that anti-aliasing, so nice anti-aliasing. But you'll notice that even on this machine, it can chug a little, right? Because we're asking it to do a lot more calculations. So for the purpose of this thing, we're going to keep it down here in the draft zone. We're going to keep it, beautifully slow. It's like a ballet. Everything's kind of sometimes slow and very pretty to look at. So. So we are going to leave it on number 1, leave it on 1, and just deal with this kind of janky choppiness until we go to render. When you go to render, you go ahead and crank those settings up, because then you can go grab a sandwich, wait for it to finish, don't worry. But while you're working, let's leave it like this. Okay, so we decided we would extrude this thing by 60, right? So if we go into our geometry options, we can't really see what's going on, right? It's really just a weird kind of extruded, dark thing. But if we were to be trying to model a phone like this one that I keep in what is arguably a very large case, but I fear destroying it. If we were to try to model a phone, what are some features it needs to have, right? Well, I think that it needs to be a kind of rectangle. So let's go 400, and you can look up the exact dimensions of a phone if you like, but we are just gonna play fast and loose with this. Let's go 400 by 700, maybe, kind of a bricky looking phone, which is great. And I want to see the edges. I want to see that the edges are different from the faces. How can we do that? Well, we're able to, here in the contents of a shape layer, go in to add, and we can add on the side a color. So now the sides are going to be a different color than the faces, right? And I mean, we can even go so far as to add something on the front, something on the side, something on the back. We can change what the bevel looks like, so we can put a bevel on this. So we can add all of these material options to extruded things in here. So even though I usually work in 2D, sometimes I mix this stuff in, and it can make a nice little flat design situation. So what you can do here is you can go ahead and pick a color that is similar to the front, but we just take this and we're just going to adjust this, maybe make it brighter. So you might make the edge like brighter or darker than the faces, right? So there we go. I think that's giving us that definition. So if we rotate it, we know it's rotating, right? That's probably the thing we want to think about. Elias is definitely, some people are edgier than others. Dark and edgy, just so good. So, speaking of edgy, we probably want, if this is going to be an iPhone, we want to round these corners off, right? Let's round those corners off, which we can do just by rounding off this rectangle. Because it's an extrusion, if you round off the shape layer, then we end up rounding the rectangle. So that's working pretty well. We're getting our rounded corners. Cool. This kind of looks more like an ice cream sandwich, I'm going to be honest with myself, which we probably should have animated instead. I skipped lunch, so I'm kind of hungry. So we're able to now, we've changed the side. Another thing that you might consider doing is putting a light in the scene. So I want you to just see what happens when we drop a light in here. Let's do a point light. And you'll notice that when we put a light in the scene, that we are actually able to, this is not a very strong light. This is a weak light. It's not being very strong here. Let's increase that. Beep, 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 beep. Strong light. There we go. So you'll notice that as you move it around, the shadow situation in the scene updates. So if you do put lights in there, you can go ahead and just drop these things in. If you want some realistic lighting, semi-realistic, realer lighting, and shadows and diffusion and reflectance. But let's keep it flat. Let's keep it flat and simple for now. Don't want to overload ourselves with this kind of thing. I'm assuming that a lot of people don't do this. So let's leave it like this. Let's leave it alone. And the other thing that we want to do for ourselves is I like to really exaggerate forms when we're creating them. So if I was to make a phone, I would actually want to cut a hole in here for where the screen is to really emphasize that bezel on this thing. But we can also deal with bevels. We can actually bevel this particular thing in the geometry options. So if you wanted to bevel yours, you could definitely do that. So let me just zoom in a little bit here so you can enjoy the beveling that is happening. So you can drop some bevel depth on this. It doesn't show up very well in flat style, so you would probably need a light to see that. But you can do concave, you can do convex, you can do all kinds of things. Let's go with none. But if I wanted to cut a hole in this, if I wanted to cut a hole in my phone, why? Just to accentuate that screen hole, the space where the screen is going to go, then we can go in here into our rectangle situation. So remember, this is a group, and inside this group, we have the rectangle path. We can delete this stroke. That's not going to be useful for us. And I'm just going to duplicate this path. So I'm going to call one of them the outside, and you can rename paths just by selecting them and hitting return. And this one I'm going to call the inside. And now on the inside, I'm going to start shrinking that down. It's not going to have any roundness at all. So let's bring this in maybe at 350. Oh, no, 300. Sure. And let's bring it down this way. Notice that you can combine objects together. You can combine these two things, and it's extruding both of them. And we want to combine these in a very special way. Let's make this smaller. Yeah, 420, sure. And we're going to add a merge paths in here. Now, merge paths, if you're not familiar, is this idea that we're going to take these two layers and we're going to perform a Boolean operation. We're going to bool them. And we're going to say how they interact with each other. Right now, they're adding. And we can change them to subtracting. So the outside subtract the inside. Right? That's kind of the order. If we switch the order of these, the outside is being subtracted from the inside, so all of it goes away, right? But in this way, the inside is being subtracted from the outside, and we end up with this lovely window. Oh, such a lovely window. Oh, so good. And so I'm toggling through the camera controls here because we're in Custom View 1. You could just snap to Custom View 2. You could check out Custom View 3. Let's go back to Custom View 1, though, as I orbit around. If you hit C, toggle the C key, you can see I toggle through my various camera tools. It allows us to go through. Oh, man. Oh, Paco, the beveling. I'm more into horror movie sequels. Paco is saying the beveling sounds like a type of horror franchise. I'd like to know what the beveling 2 would be, I don't know. The beveling 2, descent into the concave. Yes, I'm into that. Let's see. No. Convergence. No. Convex. There's something there. There is something there. Anyway, so what can we do here? So we've got our hole. We've made a hole in the thing. Phones don't have holes in them. So then we would just need to fill in the rest of the geometry. We could simply make another shape layer. You'll notice that even though the shape layer exists, we can't really see it in this view because we need to make it 3D. And then what we want to do is shrink this thing down and make it a different color. Let's just make it white like this. And you'll notice that when things live on top of each other, you get this weird tearing happening. It's nasty. So you don't really want layers to live exactly on top of each other because it creates like a tearing. I think we call it just pixel tearing. So what I'm going to do is first I'm going to try to shrink this thing down just so it fits. You could make it fit exactly. It's not totally necessary. But then what I want to do is call up its position and just push it backwards a little bit so that it lives kind of inside here. And by pushing it back, I get to expose a little bit of this edge, and the pixel tearing is gone because there's no ambiguity about what side this thing is on. Where is it? What takes priority? By making it not ambiguous anymore, I almost tried to make a really ambiguous word with my mouth. By removing that ambiguity, we've solved the problem. Now, there is another little life hack that you can do. We could make a new adjustment layer, and on some 3D layers, you're able to slip an adjustment layer between them, and you force one to be above the other. Unfortunately, I don't think that hack works anymore in the Cinema 4D renderer because its priority is a little bit more well-defined. So don't worry about that. The big thing that I want to do, though, is if you wanted to start rotating these things around, if you wanted to start having a fun time flipping this ice cream sandwich phone around, we would go New, Null Object, make this 3D, look at this thing from, let's say, the left, and we are going to push this thing back. I'm going to push it back 30 pixels. I'm going to hit AA on shape layer 1 here that I think I should call the case maybe, and I should call this one the screen. Perfectly good. And so on the case here, the extrusion depth will be 60, and the null object has been moved back 30. So that means that the null is actually in the middle center of the case. So if I take the screen and the case and I parent them both to the null, then I should be able, if we look at this through this camera here, then this should now be rotating around its middle center, right? So the anchor point of this null here has now become the true middle that I want to orbit around. So that's how we set up these kinds of models. Now, granted, these things can go quite a bit faster, once you know all the process. And so constructing more complex objects out of this series of extrusions can be difficult. Someone was asking me on Twitter the other day how they might make a cone in AfterEffects. And I was like, I wouldn't. But, I'm sure on a later thing we'll delve into the Cinema 4D Lite that allows us to actually make true 3D geometry and integrate it into After Effects. But for today, I think this is as deep as we want to go. We don't want to go any further down that rabbit hole. That's for the Beveling 3. I want to say Justice for Han, but only because that's really top of mind right now for me. So let's go back to the original example where we wanted to make this phone rotate around. Remember, our goal here is to go from a phone to a network, right? And we are going to need to do that by somehow either exploding the phone. We talked about our methods. If you're coming in late, then here's a recap. We can explode the phone into its constituent phones. If we could, or into its constituent parts, its constituent geometry, or we could morph this into being a more agreeable middle state, or we could just have the network appear on the screen of the phone. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to make this into a more agreeable middle state. And I think the ideal middle state for me is to make this into a little icon that will form part of that network. Right? Doesn't that make sense? We'll just shrink the phone down. It'll be a little icon. It'll become part of the network. That'll be great. So I'm going to hit U to call up what I did here. I'm not going to hit U. I would never hit U. I just hit the U on the keyboard. And what we do here is we're just messing with the position. We're bringing it from really close to, actually I don't have a camera in this scene, but pretend there was. You could put one in here. I've decided not to, just because I want to deal with the kind of default flatness that we get by not doing that. And we start with a little position shift. So we're just pushing the position from being right up against the camera to pushing it back, right? We're just pushing it back a little bit. And then it continues to drift. And then at a certain point, we are going to do a little priming here. So priming is where we want to telegraph that a bigger motion is going to happen. So we're kind of charging it up. This brings me to a discussion we simply must have about rotation and orientation. If you're going to be working with 3D layers, with 3D movement, with 3D rotation in After Effects, there are two concepts to think about. The first is rotation and the other is orientation. All 3D layers have both an orientation and a rotation. So we basically have two ways of manipulating how this thing is in 3D space, all right, which can be a little bit weird, I'll be honest. And I know it's the first time working with it can be pretty rough, but hopefully this will help. Orientation, it's best to think about that as how this little gizmo, this widget here, is positioned in space. Or not positioned, it's oriented in space. So if I manipulate these values, the gizmo changes where it's pointing. Now, something else to know about these orientation values is that they are kind of locked together. We can't even separate their dimensions, not easily anyway. But they come in as, a three-part thing. And they can hold values from 0 up to not quite 360. If you ever try to put a negative value in there, something below 0, in this case I tried to do -1, it goes to 359. So this value here is always, it can't loop, right? You can't loop it. You can't continue to rotate around on a certain axis with it. So the orientation is, which way are we facing, right? Think about it that way. That's which way we're facing. And the rotation is spinning around one of these axes of the gizmo, of this thing. So as we rotate around the X, we are rotating around this red part of that gizmo. So if I were to change where that red arrow is pointing, right? And then I start messing with this, you see, oh, now we're tipping around that red arrow, okay? So orientation, we are kind of pointing that thing around, and then the rotation is rotating on that axis. And Joel, that's actually a really good point. Joel is saying in the comments here that orientation is to rotation what anchor point is to position. That can be a very helpful way to think about it. Yeah, that what we're doing is we're altering sort of the core, that origin of the layer. Both of them are alterations to the origin. That anchor point, where is it in 3D space? Right? Where is it facing? So hopefully that helps. And for those of you who might be tuning in on YouTube, please join us on behance.net/live so you can enjoy all of the excellent chat. And I can read the chat. I want to read what's going on in people's minds. I want to know. We've got some great people out there. We got I know we're seeing some Jens or Jens from Germany hanging out. We got a bunch of people hanging out on the YouTubes. Come join us on Behance. Life's better on Behance. If only so I can see who's here and what their trubs are. So that's my primer on what's going on with orientation and rotation. And those are kind of really important concepts when we're thinking about how we're moving in 3D space. Elias loves my hand talking. Around here, we would say that's more of a francophone or a Quebec trait. To be very expressive. I'm very expressive for an Ontarian, I think. So. Let's continue on here and talk about how we achieve this kind of rotation, right? Let's not worry about these keyframes over here. I don't want to see those. Let's push those away. So if you want to spin something around, I like to start by just dialing in. I do indeed have a Canadian accent there, Aiken, which is also why I pronounce your name that way. I have a Canadian accent because I'm from Canada, new dude to boot it. I'm in fabulous Ottawa, Ontario, which is a fantastic city. Quite cold today, but that's every day. So if you notice any other weird Canadianisms, please let me know. So I talked about this priming motion that we want to sort of pull one way and then spin the other way. So often in 3D, we want to make use of multiple axes of movement at the same time. So I'm playing with the Z rotation here, and then I start playing with the Y rotation. And then we start picking up, a little orientation shift. What's going on there? So combining all three of these things, these three forms of motion, we get this nice smooth thing going on. We really want to have these overlap a little bit and not necessarily have that robotic start-stop at the same time, right? So you could definitely line these things up to happen at the same time. Let me show you what that feels like. Let's just make them all happen at the same time. It goes like this. So just goes like that. However, as we start to stagger these things apart, they get a little bit more of a nuanced feel to them, right? So now we've got that orientation shift staggered, and now we've got that Y rotation shift staggered. So the more you draw these things out, the more you shift them away from each other, the better it's going to feel, the more organic it's going to feel. Now, I'm going to toggle us into the graph editor here so that we can enjoy the shape of some of these. You'll notice that the X and Y rotation, an Autobot trying to wolf whistle. Love Autobot, love Transformer noises. So have a look here at this graph editor where we're looking at the X and Y rotation as they are graphed. So you can push these things, having these curves here that kind of run in parallel, and they seem to kind of drive each other, right? One pushes the other. So you want to look at where the peaks are relative to each other. And I'm looking at a speed graph here so that you can enjoy that. And then we mix in the orientation change. And the orientation change is a little bit different. Its peak is right here. So we basically have like peak, peak, and then another peak. So it's like speed, speed, speed. By not lining these up necessarily, we kind of get to flow it a little bit. So always think about that when you're looking at your motion. If you think, oh, this is a little bit robotic, why? Then you should definitely consider staggering your keyframes away from each other, stretching them out a little bit. And in particular, think about them going maybe exponentially to their ends. So you'll notice this is like 1, 2, very far away. So it's like a few frames in between here, more frames in between here. And if there was another thing, we would probably push it out with even more frames even further away, right? So that's something to think about. Also notice that, hey, we have a position change happening here as well. And that is, again, staggered again. So it's good to stagger all of these things. Even the position change is staggered. You know, we're getting into it. Oh, we're starting to accelerate. And if you have a look here at the graph editor for that, its moment of most acceleration is around here, which is actually very similar to both of these. So these line up a little bit. It's a little bit, I don't know, it's a little bit like music, right? That not everything should happen all the time at the same time, right? Because that wouldn't be very good. You shouldn't always have everything happen, you know, at the same time. Sometimes you want it on eighths or on fifths or however you're composing things. I'm not good at music making, so more visual. But animation follows some of the same ideas of rhythm. So you want to, if you want to make this thing feel natural, then that's how it goes. So let's continue along our adventure here. And as this thing is kind of coming together, we need to decide how we're going to turn this into a network. We don't have a heap of time to make that happen, but how would we do it? How do we go there next, right? If we simply orient this down into this configuration, it's a rectangle. So in my mind, we need to squish that down and make it into a cube. Boop. And I like to do that by expanding and then contracting. So it's coming around, it's like it's getting a lot of momentum. It expands, maybe because of the speed has centripetally forced this thing to elongate, and then it contracts into this form. So from here, we can move on and create the rest of the network. So whoop, this becomes small, and now we can have a series of cubes explode out from this. So we can do that in many ways. We might use a particle system. We might use, something like a plexus, or we might use something like, let's see, what would we do? We could use like a trap code. We could use trap code form, trap code particular. We could use, we could really just use shape layers, which honestly is what I sometimes like to do. How we solve for this depends on what we're going to do with it next. So if we need to individually art direct where all these things go. We have, Joel, we have not already designed the network. We are coming in late with that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a little cube, make just a wee little cube, little cubelet, a little cuboid, not a cuboid, sorry, something that's cube-ish. And I'm just going to go ahead and make this a little cube like this. So we're going to come in, the phone comes in, and then it's going to snap to being a cube. So I think these things need to start here. And then they're going to explode out, right? So let's think about just one of them for now, and then we'll deal with the rest later. What I'm going to do, shall we use perhaps a repeater of sorts? So I am a big repeater fan. I love the repeater. Repeaters you can add into things like this. So now this repeater is now a part of this shape group. And the repeater is basically making more instances. Let's make 8. Let's make 8 instances. And each instance is being modified in some way. So I'm going to modify them to not change their position at all. No, not interested in that. But what I'm going to do is take this rectangle path and I'm going to push it away. Let's push it up like this. So let's push it like minus 200. All right. So maybe that's where oh, no, let's go further. Minus 250. Keep going. Minus 300. Okay, I'm happy with there. And let's set a keyframe on that. And we need to make more of them. We need more. So the repeater, I'm making 8 of them. But where are they? Where are these things? Well, we can start to see them if we rotate where each copy is. So we're rotating each of them 45 degrees, which will set them out in the world like this. Cool. So with that in mind, how might we keyframe them moving out? Well, we can just change the position here down to 0 and check this out. They are now exploding out. Something like that. Right? Easy stuff. We can now go into the graph editor, make it a little bit more explosive, like so. And there we go. We got this thing exploding. Something that I think it requires is a little rotation, a little rotational action, because if this thing has rotational momentum, why wouldn't this also have rotational momentum? So let's set a keyframe here. So when it explodes out, maybe we can rotate it negative 22.5, something like that. All right, good. Same thing. We want to easy ease and push it like that. So comes in. So there we go. We might even delay this quite a bit more. Let's just have it keep on rotating. Nice and slow like that. And if we've made 1, let's make 2. So now I can duplicate this, grab another copy of this, and let's see, this will be like a second layer that goes inside more like this. Okay. And what I think I'll do is I'll just dial in here. When you hit the U key twice, that's going to call up everything you've altered about that layer. So let's go to negative 150 maybe. Maybe I'm trying to be a little bit mathematically precise here, right? I don't know why. I don't know what the point of that is. But what I want to do is go in here, and on the repeater, we're not going to have 8 copies. Let's only have 6 copies. And that means that being at 45 degrees doesn't make a lot of sense. I'm going to level with you. Math is hard for me, so I like to make the computer do math for me. So I'm going to take the rotation. I'm going to take the pick whip here and move it, point it at the copies, right? Which means that now the rotation of each thing is equal to the number of copies. So right now it's 6. So just imagine that this block here means 6. So what if I took 360 degrees and divided by 6? Well, I'd end up with this, because 360 divided by 6 is the exact amount that I want to have them separated by. If a mean producer came in later and said, I don't want 6, I want 7. Okay, good, I'll increase it to 7. I want 10. Okay, well, there you go. Now it's 10. So this is using an expression to take some of the work away from us, because I don't think that I'm ever going to change the distance between these things. I don't think I'm going to change. I don't think I'm going to change them to be unevenly distributed. I think they're always going to be evenly distributed. And then we can just let this thing do the updating for us. So we don't need to work too hard. Let the computer do the work. That's what computers are for, doing work. For us, humans, they're overlords. So now I think maybe let's call these outside bits. And let's call these inside bits. All right, now we've got our inside bits, we've got our outside bits, and what we want to do is maybe have the outside bits drift a little longer than the inside bits. Oh, they can go longer than that. There we go. Get some more variety going. Okay, and let's stagger their rotational stop as well. That's all right. Feeling that. So now we have what I'm going to describe as a very difficult challenge, connecting these. If we wanted to connect these as a network, now we've set ourselves a real oopsie doodle, right? Because there is no information for us to grab from each of those little instances, right? Now there is, of course, some things we can make use of fairly regularly, right? We could pretty easily connect the inside of things to each of these. I don't think that would be super hard. I don't think that would be an impossible task for us. But what we might just do, it really depends on the narrative of this piece, right? So if, for example, the narrative is a bunch of connected points that explode from each other and then become connected, right? Then we can just wait till it comes to rest and then connect these bad boys, right? Or what we might do is we might consider connecting them together. If we wanted to use a particle system like Plexus, that might be the way to go. Or if we wanted to use some other kind of method, if we want to use like the paths to nulls script to try to link things together, that might be a way to go. Personally, I am feeling a little bit lazy. So what I think I will do is I'm going to take these layers. I am going to Command-Shift-D split them off. I'm going to Command-Shift-C pre-compose them and call this network, like that. And go into this network, and I'm just going to drag this back. I'm going to zero out all these keyframes. So it's like it's always been this way. So this has always been this way, which is great. I'm going to go back to the beginning here. I want this to be a bit of a loop, right? So this network here, I'm going to make it three-dimensional. All right. Now I'm going to parent it to this thing we called screen. I'm going to take its position. I'm going to bump it forward a little bit. Sorry, I'm going to bump it -1. Oopsie. And I'm going to start scaling that down. How much do I need to scale it down? I'm not sure yet because I don't yet know. What I want to do is I'm going to call up my ruler. I'm going to set a little mark right around here. I'm going to go back to the beginning. And then I'm going to scale this down until I hit that mark. That looks correct. Now let's play that through. And when should this layer terminate? It should terminate here. I know, I just wanted to look clever, so I wanted to make it loop so that everyone thought I was cool. So check this out. We got this. Oh, I forgot one. I forgot one little bit. I gotta get a little bit in here. So I'm gonna duplicate this. This one does not have a repeater. This one is not going anywhere. It's just in the middle. It's not rotated in a funny way. It's just like that. Okay. So there we go. Now we're looping. Let's have a look at that. Boo! So I am happy with this loop. I'm sorry we didn't get to connect all of these network bits, but we do have to wrap up the show at some point. So this is where we go back to me on the screen, and I thank everyone for coming out. I want to thank everyone for coming out and hanging out with me. I know this isn't our usual time slot. Usually we got some Adobe XD talk at this time on Friday, but I really appreciate you all coming out, spending some time with me here in the chat, having a good time. You know, I always have a great time hanging out with you all, and one thing I'll say is that I hope that you all go out and make some interesting things with the techniques that we talk about here. If you missed our last week's show and the one before that, go back and watch them all on Behance and check those out. And of course, you should come back here on Monday. There's a lot of great stuff going on Monday. You know, Tim, who you see in the chat here, he's going to be on the show. He's going to be talking about portraits, I am told. And Voodoo Val is also going to be on the show on Monday. That's going to be a lot of things. I can't paint, so I should probably be tuning in to learn those skills. I really want to learn how to use Adobe Fresco so that I can make that happen. I'm a keyframer. That's my life. That's how I do it. But thank you again for coming out. I'm Evan Abrams. I was going to say I've been Evan Abrams, but I continue to still be Evan Abrams. Thank you so much for coming out and spending time with me here on the show. I really appreciate you all. And stay safe, stay healthy, and we'll see you next week.